Okay, read page 275 and 276 before you watch the rest.
They rebuked Peter. They are rebuked. Peter is called Satan by Jesus. Mark 8:33, and Paul rebukes Peter for being wrong about a theological issue. Paul writes, when Peter came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he was clearly in the wrong. Now, listen, Paul is the upstart, right? Paul was not a disciple. And here is Paul in Scripture dressing down Peter, one of the most famous, one of the three closest people to Jesus. That's not going to help the thing, right? Peter's an idiot, and that's basically what he's calling him. So now keep in mind that Peter is one of the pillars of the early church, and here's Paul including in Scripture that he was wrong. They are cowards. All the disciples but one hide when Jesus goes to the cross. Peter even denies him 3 times after explicitly promising, I will never disown you. Meanwhile, as the men are hiding for fear of the Jews, the brave women stand by Jesus and are the first to discover the empty tomb. They are doubters, despite being taught several times that Jesus would rise from the dead. The disciples are doubtful when they hear of his resurrection. Some are even doubtful after they see him risen. Now, think about this. If you were a New Testament writer, would you include these embarrassing details if you were making up a story? Would you write that one of your primary leaders was called Satan by Jesus, denied the Lord 3 times, hid during the crucifixion, and was later corrected on a theological issue? Would you depict yourselves as uncaring, bumbling cowards and the women whose testimony was not even admissible in court as the brave ones who stood by Jesus and later discovered the empty tomb? Would you admit that some of you, the 11 remaining disciples, doubted the very Son of God after he had proven himself risen to all of you? Of course not. What do you think the New Testament writers would have done if they were making up a story? You know perfectly well. They would have left out their ineptness, their cowardice, the rebuke, the 3 denials, and their theological problems, and depicted themselves as bold believers who stood by Jesus through it all, and who confidently marched down to the tomb on Sunday morning, right through the elite Roman guards, to find the risen Jesus waiting to congratulate them on their great faith. The men who wrote it also would say that they declared the risen Jesus to the women, who were the ones hiding for fear of the Jews. And of course, if the story was a concoction, no disciple at any time would have been portrayed as doubting, especially after Jesus had risen. In short, we don't have enough faith to believe that the New Testament writers included all of those embarrassing details in a made-up story. The best explanation is that they were really telling the truth, warts and all. 2. The New Testament writers included embarrassing details and difficult sayings of Jesus. The New Testament writers are also honest about Jesus. Not only do they record self-incriminating details about themselves, they also record embarrassing details about their leader, Jesus, that seem to place him in a bad light. Jesus is considered out of his mind by his mother and brothers, his own family, who come to seize him in order to take him home. Jesus is not believed by his own brothers. He is thought to be a deceiver. He is deserted by many of his followers. He turns off Jews who had believed in him to the point that they want to stone him. He is called a drunkard. He is called demon-possessed. He is called a madman. He has his feet wiped with the hair of a prostitute, an event that had the potential to be perceived as a sexual advance. He is crucified by the Jews and Romans despite the fact that anyone who is hung on a tree is under God's curse. That's in Deuteronomy, and it's also quoted in Galatians. This is certainly not a list of events and qualities the New Testament writers would choose if they were trying to depict Jesus as the perfect, sinless God-man. Nor are these qualities congruent with the Jewish expectation that the Messiah would come to free them from political oppression. In fact, according to their own Bible at the time, the Old Testament, Jesus was cursed by God for being hanged on a tree. The best explanation for these embarrassing details is that they actually occurred and the New Testament writers are telling the truth. In addition to embarrassing details, there are several difficult sayings attributed to Jesus that the New Testament writers would not have included if they were making up a story about Jesus being God. For example, according to the New Testament, Jesus declares the Father is greater than I. How do we explain that? Seems to predict incorrectly that he's coming back to earth within a generation. Then says about his second coming that no one knows the time, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son. Seems to deny his deity by asking the rich young ruler, "Why do you call me good? No one is good except God alone." Is seen cursing a fig tree for not having figs when it wasn't even the season for figs. Seems unable to do miracles in his hometown except to heal a few sick people. If the New Testament writers wanted to prove to everyone that Jesus was God, then why did they leave in these difficult sayings that seem to argue against his deity? Moreover, Jesus makes what seems to be a completely morbid claim. I tell you the truth, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. After this hard saying, John says, from this time many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. Since the New Testament, not the 12, but he had others that since the New Testament writers certainly would not invent this strange saying, an unfavorable reaction, it must be authentic. While there are reasonable explanations for these difficult sayings, it doesn't make sense that the New Testament writers would leave them in if they were trying to pass off a lie as the truth. In fact, it doesn't make sense that they would make up a character anything like Jesus. A weak and dying Messiah, a sacrificial lamb, is the very antithesis of a man-made hero. Again, the best explanation is that the New Testament writers were not playing fast and loose with the facts, but were extremely accurate in recording exactly what Jesus said and did. So now, if you would please turn in your little atheist books to the quick question. So you see on that first page, page 75, the part of the logical argument that where we are now. We've talked about the New Testament is historically reliable, and that it's evidenced by early testimony, eyewitness testimony, and then now we're on uninvented, authentic testimony. And the main idea of this chapter is that there are 10 good reasons to believe that the New Testament writers told the truth. This can be argued on the basis that the writers didn't invent a story, embellish their story, or even exaggerate. And then we'll be talking about the principle of embarrassment, which we already have, divergent details, and more. So we can go past the emboldened for now. So equip number 1. List the 10 reasons we know the New Testament writers told the truth. So go through your book right now and write those 10 things down. And when you're done with that, we'll read those off. These are the 10. Embarrassing personal details, embarrassing details and difficult sayings of Jesus. Left in demanding sayings of Jesus. carefully distinguished Jesus' words from their own. They include events related to the resurrection that they would not have invented. They give more than 30 historically confirmed people in the New Testament. They include divergent details. They don't all tell the exact same story. They challenge readers to check out their facts. If you're lying to your parents about something you did in Bible class, the one thing you are not going to say is, well, email Mrs. Keyser, ask her if I did that. You're not going to do that, are you, if you actually did something? So that's essentially what they're saying when they ask people, and Paul is going to do this in 1 Corinthians 15, the passage that you're starting to memorize right now. He says he appeared to more than 500 witnesses at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen. He's basically saying. Oh, there it is. Challenge readers. Describe miracles like other historical events, and they abandoned their lifelong beliefs for new ones and kept them until their deaths. Most of those disciples did not die a natural death. Okay, everybody got all 10 of them? Okay, great. Question 2, explain how including embarrassing details about themselves implies that what the writers wrote is probably true. Yes.
So do you see if most authors just didn't know anything that makes them look bad?
Right. When you make up a story, you make yourself look good. I'm sure that you have done this, parents or teachers. I know I did when I was your age. Sometimes I do it at my age to make myself look better than I am. We all tend to give the best version of ourselves. And remember what their goal was. They're trying to persuade people that Jesus is the Christ. And so, if you're trying to persuade people that Jesus is the Christ, you're going to have things like we see in the Gnostic Gospels, talking crosses that reach to the sky and things like that. But they didn't do that. I have this young man's permission to tell you. But when the class of 2019 was either in their junior or senior year, Carl Jung told a story about himself. And the story was that he was on a mission trip. We only, we just, back then we had a mission trip in the whole school. And actually, this was before my time, before I went on a mission trip. I was teaching. I wasn't going on a mission trip. And I think he was a sophomore or a freshman. Anyway, they were at Camp Calvin Crest on a trip at Camp Calvin Crest. And Carl didn't look where he was walking, and he stepped on a board, right on a nail, went right through his shoe and into his foot. And 2 senior boys picked him up and ran with him to the bunkhouse or wherever Mr. Hood was so that he could get the medical attention he needed. Now, when Carl tells the story, it is much more hilarious and embarrassing. you wouldn't look at them and go, that didn't happen. You know, first of all, if you didn't call, but that kind of a story is accepted as true in part because it's embarrassing. So I wrote this down. So I'm gonna pick on you. I'm not saying you'd ever do this, but I just think you'll give a good answer. So if you owned, say, a shady roofing company, and you wanted clients, how would you paint a picture of your and you would make it sound like you were really the best. Yeah. That's what people do when they lie, right? They give the story that's too good to be true, and you know that saying. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Yeah. Number 3, explain how including difficult sayings of Jesus imply that what the writers wrote is probably true. Yes.
It shows that the events aren't following like by the author.
Yeah. At very least, they just leave it out, right? They wouldn't have to change it, but like let's not do this one where he says, "Eat my flesh and drink my blood." Let's just and I don't know if the gospel writers like should we do this, but they left it in there, right? So they are trying to convince people that Jesus is Messiah, and embarrassing details about Jesus, like having a prostitute wash his feet, and hard sayings would work against that. Yes.
Makes me think of celebrities that have like Zoom managers that kind of do like damage control, but someone says something
Right.
that gets taken down.
Right.
Like they weren't trying to do
He was just exhausted. This has been so busy, he was just exhausted.
No, he was high as a kite, He was,
Tried to destroy the temple.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So all of those are good answers. Okay, there's one more thing I wanted to mention. Oh, I will figure it out.